Hi, I'm Andrea Johnson.
And I'm Kipp Corbus. We are married psychologists who, as our own therapist would tell you, we are living proof that having doctorates in psychology doesn't exempt you from needing to constantly work on your own relationships.
Hey there. Welcome to the Redirect Podcast. This is where we dive into real conversations, share stories, and just hang out talking about finding our purpose in retirement. We're glad you're along for the ride, and let's get into it. Curt, Dale, in the studio again. Glad to be with you guys. Today on the Redirect Podcast, we're going to talk about relationships, namely with our spouses, friends, families, mailmen, whatever else we can come up with that are important to us. So, question to kick things off, get things warmed up. Now that you're out of the 9-to-5 grind, how has your relationship with your wife changed, if at all?
All right, I'll jump in. As you may remember from past episodes, my wife, Fran, and I actually worked together for about 7 years. So as I thought about going into the retirement phase, we were 24/7 running a business, and I think that sets you up well for the reentry into this new relationship, which is in my redirected years, my next 30, with Fran. And one thing that we've done, I think, really well, and the bottom line is that things are going very well, is she has her own passions. She is all about the horse. Me, I'm all about this and cycling and gardening. And those are things that I do separately from her. And golfing, which has been really big. So, and then we have a life of things that we share together. So the balance has been really good. But I think we were really tried and tested when we had to work together 24/7. Both in the house and at work.
So you had some practice at this.
We had a lot of practice at this.
That's cool.
And for some reason, I just still love spending time with her. So
for some
it works
reason,
out.
Who knew? No idea how that happened.
I, too, had a benefit of working at home. I was in remote sales, so my office was my house. So I was home a good part of the time. So we're used to being around one another. Has my relationship improved since leaving my career? I'm going to say definitely. It'd be great to have Jackie here to have her opinion, but I think she'd agree.
Let me call her. Let me see what...
Because what's been really great is, as we learned from the T.D. Durker podcast about how men are unable to multitask and that work is their focal point in which to get them forward. I spent too much time on my work and not necessarily seeing all the things that were happening with myself and my wife or being a part of that. And now that that is gone, it has been a joy to just sort of see where we're going and what we're going to do together. But I'm also needing to work on it. I'm not where I want to be yet. We just had an experience not too long ago where we went out to the Daniel Boone National Park and just spent 4 days in the woods. And it was so much fun. And it was so surprising to Jackie because it was so unlike me to totally unplug like that.
So, Dale, why don't you tell us about our guests?
Today, we are very fortunate to have Kipp Corbus back in the studio. Kipp's joined us on episode 23, where we had a spirited conversation on the psychology of transition, which was very enlightening. As our avid listeners may recall, Kipp is a licensed clinical psychologist with nearly 2 decades of experience helping leaders grow and thrive. Over the past 19 years, he's worked as an executive coach and organizational development consultant across both the federal government and private sector, supporting individuals and teams through big transitions, leadership challenges, and culture shifts. Joining Kipp today on our podcast is Kipp's wife, Dr. Andrea Johnson. Andrea is a clinical psychologist and manages her own practice. Andrea earned a Bachelor of Arts degree at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, and a Master's of Arts and Doctor of Psychology degree in clinical psychology at Xavier University here in Cincinnati. Andrea has spent her 20-year career working with individuals, couples, and families in psychotherapy and with individuals looking for clarification of diagnoses or support in the assessment and testing process. Kipp and Andrea have been married for 16 years, have 2 great kids, Xavier, who's 15, and Juliet, who's 13. Kipp, welcome back. And Andrea, thank you so much for joining us today. We are thrilled to have you both on the Redirect podcast.
Thank you.
Happy to be back. Thank you.
So I want to kick it right off. How would you define relationship?
I think a relationship is that time spent together, or the focus on one another. So whether it's a husband and wife, or family members, or coworkers, it's about focusing on what's important to the two of you and building that joint kind of interest versus your own individual interest. So you have your separate selves, and then you come together and you have an entirely different entity, and that's the relationship.
And why is relationship important?
Yeah, I mean, connection is the word that comes to mind when you talk about relationships, and people crave connection. I think that is, it looks different for different people, and you talked about last time just the variability from person to person. But I think some kind of connection is something everybody craves, wants, and looks for. I notice that at work, in work settings, people look for that. In personal settings, people look for it. And I think they are just looking to connect with people, have that shared meaning, have that way to interact with people that's meaningful, genuine, authentic. And I think people just look for that connection.
It's interesting. You can see how in some of those studies that they've done for how behavior exists in individuals, you dump a pile of random people into some setting, they tend to, orient themselves in like interest, or connections start to happen organically, because I think biologically, metaphysically, intellectually, emotionally, we were made for connection. The people you see that really don't have a lot of connection, they seem to be some abnormality. They tend to be, the unhealthiest version of people in our society for the most part. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, connections, if you look at the evolutionary perspective of relationships, that family and tribes and things like that, that's how we survived, right? We didn't survive individually thousands of years ago. We had to have each other to protect each other, to share food with, to co-build shelters with. And so I don't think that we've lost that. We may be in 2025 where we're all, living these independent, siloed kind of lives, but we haven't lost that evolutionary perspective of needing relationships to survive.
Yeah.
How are we doing in the world today with relationships? Connection. We hear so much. I mean, just is becoming prevalent. Is business going crazy for you guys, or what's going on out there?
Well, you said that with a chuckle, so I mean, I think I'm probably going to follow with the same kind of mentality, is that we're not doing great in terms of facilitating and holding those relationships as being a priority. It is business going well? I mean, I guess if that's the way you look at it, yeah, like people are coming in, they need support, they need
based on
help.
demand.
Yeah, they need that. And our focus, at least culturally in this country, has been on independence and building our independent wealth and building our own businesses or our own property values or things like that. And we're not necessarily connecting in the same way that we used to. And I think, like Kipp said, people crave that. They need that. And so just because the culture is not focusing on that doesn't mean that we're not still looking for that. And so we feel this like emptiness or a lack somewhere. And what's the word I'm looking for? Like a gap, something like that, where we just don't have that. And people are searching for it, and they can't find it on their own.
As the grumpy old grumpier old men to my right, we tend to think that, there's been a societal shift over the past 15 years, because we like to say kids in my day never did this stuff. And so I'm curious, from your professional insight, do you feel like there's an acceleration in that relational decline over the last decade or so?
Yes, I do. I mean, we can all say that. Even, your generation might be slightly different from our generation, but not by much. But even my generation, I can look back and say it's changed since I was in my teens. And again, I think it comes from increasing focus on selves, on individual success, on how we define ourselves. Even mental health, as we've evolved over the last 30, 40 years, has focused on self and your own mental health rather than looking at a collective kind of approach with that. And so, I guess I don't know the exact acceleration pace of any of this, but I do think that we are continuing to devolve in that way, and that's a problem. And that's part of what I see as the reason for the increase in mental health diagnoses and need for services over this youngest generation. Those who are maybe 25 and under, we see them pursuing mental health services at a greater rate than we did in my generation or you did in your generation. And I think in part it's because we continue to focus on self instead of, and that's one of the things that we're seeing, that these kids are hearing that message and not.
So that's a two-sided coin, right? Some of it is people are seeking out help because it's become less taboo. People are more comfortable with,
True.
Going and getting some professional insight and perspective. But it feels like the need for that is increasing.
Yes, both. Correct. Yeah, absolutely. And that's not a bad thing to have a greater focus on mental health. I think that's a great thing. But I think we're missing the other side of that coin that you referred to, is that why are mental health diagnoses increasing? Is it just because we are more aware and it's more culturally appropriate or more okay to talk about? I don't think that's the answer. And I think a lot of researchers and a lot of clinicians are looking for the whys. People are blaming things like smartphones or social media, and right. I can't say that that's not part of it, but I think that feeds into what I'm talking about, which is it separates us. It doesn't pull us together.
So for our audience's sake, what primary age group do you work with as psychologists?
So as a clinician, my focal point has always been adolescence, young adulthood, which for the general population, people tend to think of that as teenagers and maybe early 20s when you say that. But in psychology, adolescence really ranges. It starts early, age 10, 11 maybe, and ranges all the way to mid to late 20s. And so the people that I see tend to be between the ages of 10 and maybe 30 primarily.
All right. Kipp, what about you?
Yeah, it looks like we got the ages all covered with us because I do the organization development consulting. So I mainly work with working age people. I have a leader I'm working with right now who's 29, and I have a leader I'm working with right now who's 73. So it's a pretty wide range.
So professionally, we got the spectrum covered. Okay. Now, another caveat that we have is that you guys are a husband and wife. And I made this comment to you earlier. I would love to just sit in your house and hear your dialogues about things that are happening within the family on relationship, and just curious if you pull the psychology card or if you're pulling the person. It's this outlook that we're going to have in this conversation, not only because of your professional aspect, but we also have a personal aspect that I'm intrigued to see how this all works together as well.
Yeah, forgive us if we pry on that to see what pops out, because that seems really exciting to us.
You are more than welcome to pry. I think you might be simultaneously interested and maybe sometimes disappointed to sit at our dinner table, because I think we're probably more boring than you think. So
Dale, as our next door neighbor, might have heard some of those conversations at our dinner table.
I've got a whole list ready to ask about a year ago when I heard some screaming
fair.
And yelling going on. Somebody was holding up their degree and saying, "Hey, wait a second. I've got this psychology degree."
And then the other one comes out with theirs from
with
the
the club.
room. Yeah.
Saying, but I got the club.
Yeah, which is worse, the screaming, yelling, high pitched, high volume argument, or the quieter, more clinical, professional. Yeah, but you're doing X, and that's not healthy or right, or whatever.
Okay, actually, we do have those conversations a lot where we say, you know why you're doing this, right? In fact, I think you said one of those today in the kitchen. And I don't think I had nice words to say in response to that. So I think we do utilize it a lot, and maybe we don't even realize we're doing it, honestly. And I think that's one of the cons of being a psychologist is sometimes it's part of my, I don't even think about it. I don't even think about understanding. It just happens. It's kind of like when you learn a foreign language and you become fluent in it and you start thinking in that language. You don't have to translate anymore. That's kind of the way it is for me in clinical psychology. I don't even have to think about it.
It's an emotional dexterity, right? You've got some the tools. I'm a woodworker by hobby, and I get very comfortable with tools, and I know which one to pull out, and I know how to wield it, appropriately, and to some degree. Those methodologies, those perspectives that you've learned, and either by experience or education, those are just tools themselves, right? And you wield those, on your own perspective and possibly against your spousal opponent in the argument sometimes, right?
Yeah, and Andrea's favorite thing to say to me when we have those conversations is, "Well, you're not my psychologist." And she uses some other choice words in there. And I think that's part of the value of our role. I think is we're separate. When you're a psychologist or somebody else, you're separate and you have those boundaries from the personal life. We have a lot of different things going on between us that clouds all of that judgment, all those perfect. I know I'm not perfect with the perfectly empathic statements and the reflection statements. It's clouded by all the history we have, which is just real and there. And so it just doesn't work the same way. So people think we have these really intellectual discussions. We do have some of those, talking about our kids and what they need and that type of thing. But we also have plenty of times where what we know to do doesn't play out that way.
I go back, and the tools that we've had are the kind of big 7 Habits self-help books, and we've got these little things that Fran and I have learned together, and that she'll pull all those chapters out. And I think I told you guys when we ran into our first disagreement, Fran put 2 columns together. One was, I feel this, and the other one was, my rational side said this.
Smart woman.
That sounds very helpful.
And all of a sudden, I didn't know which way to go. I was, wait a second, I want to deal with the rational one made more sense. And again, Fran was the person I was going to report to I'd stayed at Procter & Gamble. So I have to give her this. This is the kind of woman that I chose to live the rest of my life with, and deal with that. And our ability to connect has been based on how she shared with me all the books that we needed to read together, so that we had rules, so we had tools, and that's how we went.
So we all know that men and women are different. I'm going to be very honest. I mean, I say things, and then all of a sudden I have things come back at me about my tone, my rate of speech, my intimidation, I shut off, and all these things. But I can't always process things. I can't process things like a woman. Are our brains different? Do men do things differently than women that makes relationship building difficult while it seems more natural for a woman?
So biologically, structurally, chemically, our brains are not vastly different. Developmentally, we are very different. And so if we take 2 brains, one male and one female, and we look at from birth through, let's say, age 25 to 30, those 30 years, you can see different rates of development and different, this part of the brain will speed up or will develop more quickly in a woman, and maybe this part of the brain will develop more quickly in the man. So you see sort of these varying developmental stages. So men tend to be behind women in terms of prefrontal cortex development. And the prefrontal cortex is the part that's right behind your forehead, and it's the one that it manages our executive functioning as a simple kind of approach. that's simplifying what it does, but it coordinates everything. It organizes everything. It's the conductor of the orchestra. I'm stealing that analogy from somebody, I don't remember who, but where it says, okay, now we're going to pull in the horns, and now we're going to pull in the brass, or the drums. We're going to pull in, and it says, now we've got this cohesive product, this gorgeous piece, right? Not just all these discordant instruments. And so in men and boys, that is slower to develop. The neuronal connections don't develop quite as quickly as they do in the female brain. And so that's why we notice in the adolescent male versus the adolescent female, we notice a lot more impulsivity, more difficulties managing. Not that girls don't, trust that they do, but boys tend to manage that more poorly and take more time to develop their full potential in that part of the brain. But I think sociologically is where you see the difference. So as we develop and we get older, the brain changes based on the society we live in. And so different neural pathways will strengthen and others will just prune away. And that happens because women sociologically are and have, at least historically in this country, been asked to do things like coordinate the home or manage doctor's appointments. I'm kind of grasping at straws here for those things, but those details tend to fall into the women's domain, even though things are changing, right? Even though men, if it's a heterosexual relationship, men in the relationship have started to pick up and do a lot more of that over the last 30, 40 years. But women's brains haven't changed just because
responsibilities have balanced.
Thank you. Those are the words I was looking for. Yeah. And so we have highways that are being paved and we have highways that are being destroyed in our brain between the neural pathways. And I think that's the differences we see primarily.
And I think it's fascinating, as we look at the whole spectrum, and Kipp, maybe into your area, men's ability to have emotional relationships and to make those connections still seems to be a big deal, a big problem. Guys, don't do a really good job, of having a connected conversation, with their wife or whatever. Do you see that later on, what happens earlier on in the, men developing later? Is that just keeps going on and on? Are we going to be kind of behind the 8 ball when it comes to, connecting easily?
Yeah, well, Andrea says my prefrontal cortex hasn't developed a lot of times, so I'm glad she answered that more complex question.
I felt sarcasm there. How did you feel about that?
She felt that was an accurate statement. People are different. And again, I talked about this a lot last time. There are stereotypes, there's gender differences. I think that's absolutely true. And then people are just different. Andrea and my relationships looks different. As a heterosexual relationship, it looks different than other heterosexual relationships we've had. There are certain parts of emotional connection I think I do a really good job of talking about, and there's certain parts I don't. And likewise for Andrea. So one of the things you'll see from Terry Real, who your one guest talked a ton about, Gottman, all these famous psychologists and clinicians who talked about relationships, conflict is inevitable. So there is going to be conflict in everything you do. It's how you manage the conflict that I think needs to be there. I think it is hard. It is way easier, like we were talking about staying by yourself. It is way easier to stay by yourself because you're not dealing with conflict. You're only have to worry about yourself, and you don't have to manage all the complexities. As long as you're choosing to be in relationships, there's going to be conflict that you're going to have to resolve and manage and deal with. And I think at times we avoid it because it's easier. And I think that's one thing we've learned in our relationship. I think when we're talking with clients, it's how do you, and the same thing Gottman, Real, all those different people talk about, is how do you deal with that? Make sure you're managing it, make sure intentionally doing something about it versus completely avoiding it.
And I would like to postulate that there's no one that is better than the other. I think there's a tendency to think that, a more mature perspective on the emotional aspects of a relationship makes one party better than the other. I tend to think that, and it's really just a matter of to where does the strength fall in a given complement of people. And those things are indeed, I believe, complementary. And where the individual in the relationship has the capacity to be the most mature, healthy version of themselves. and they bring both parties bring that to their relationship, it is complementary. And that is where connection becomes really possible. And while single folks by choice, because I choose to be single because I'm just trying to avoid all of the messy drama of conflict and the, all of the nonsense that goes with conflict and the emotional toll that takes on you. Yes, you're taking the easier road in that you're avoiding conflict, but you're also giving up what could be a complementary part of a couple. What say you?
Yeah, I love the way you said that. I think there is, it's two things. It's looking at how you complement each other. I do that with work relationships all the time. Andrea and I talk about it. I think we actually really complement each other well. We are very different, but it's a complement. Very different can lead to conflict, and very different can lead to complementary behaviors. And I think that's our constant work in our relationship, is how to balance those differences so they're complementary versus conflicting. And I think also it's the appreciation of the strengths of the other person. So if you can respect that, appreciate that, and it doesn't matter what kind of relationship you're in, if you can respect the strengths of that individual, I think you're way ahead of the game and appreciating what they bring to the table. A lot of times what I do, and I think Andrea does this in her work too, it's helping that person identify those strengths and finding those good things about the other person. And that can really help you appreciate the relationship versus resent it.
You mentioned the episode that we did with Simon and Patty Foster about authentic communication. And then, if you recall in that episode, the aspect was Simon, international worker out in many different lights, finished his career and then came home and sort of brought his work persona into the house, which then created some conversation. So not only is there, and plus when I chat with a lot of guys that are about to retire, it's like, what am I going to do 365, 24/7 with my wife? Because I'm not used to that. So there's two things there that you've sort of touched on. The identity change that happens when we go from one transition to another, as well as then, which you've sort of touched on a little bit, how do we get to know that other person in a different way, as opposed to coming in with all of our bags of this is who we are, and then we have this polarizing situation. Any advice or commentary on that?
Oh, I think what I thought of when you were talking was about what I mentioned earlier, where you have two entities. You have the two, again, even if we're talking about a married couple or a relationship in that way, a romantic relationship, you've got two entities, two separate individuals, and they've developed their personality structures. They were born with temperaments that have just developed over the years. They've become their own person. And then you have that entire separate. So you have to see each other as separate people, and then that relationship as like a whole person that you need to focus on.
So it's like a Venn diagram of marriage.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Right. So and that's what I think sometimes people forget, whether it's a marriage or whether it's a work partnership, something like that, is that they forget that they are somebody, the other person is somebody, and that relationship is equally, it's a whole other entity that they have to focus on. So a person coming into retirement with a spouse that maybe is also coming into retirement, or that spouse is still working, or that spouse has been at home raising the kids and taking care of the home and doing all of that, is that you both have to be kind of like you guys started out today talking about. You have to have your own interests. You have to have your own identity separate from your spouse. That has to exist, and that has to exist in a strong way to keep that identity, to maintain that identity. And retirement is already a point of changing identity. So you have to focus on yourself in that, and then spend that equal amount of time focusing on the relationship as a separate entity.
I think this would be a good time to take a quick break. If you're enjoying our show, we'd be incredibly grateful if you could take a moment to comment. And if you like what you're hearing, leave us a 5-star review. Your feedback not only makes our day, but helps other listeners discover our content. Your support through listening, sharing, following, and reviewing means the world to us and helps our podcast grow. Thanks so much for being part of the Redirect family. So let's now get back to our conversation. You hit on something, Kipp, that I think is something that people going into a new relationship, you have to step out. You have to act. You have to realize and develop yourself, your own identity. That takes work. So how does somebody, what's your recommendation of, okay, somebody's just come out of a career, their whole life kind of is identified by this career. Now I'm going to be retired. I've got to develop my own identity. What are the steps to take to do that?
Yeah, and so I'm going to take I think we talked about this last time a little bit too. I'm going to take the pressure off of this whole new recreation. I'm going to use your guys' podcast name of Redirect to kind of go to that. I mean, Curt, you used the word different relationship. Dale, you just said something like, this new, it's still the same. And I think Andrea, we were all talking the other day, Andrea mentioned the same thing. It's still the same person throughout this. So I think there's a lot of things. One of the things I think you can do is learn from all those things. Like Andrea and I have figured out a lot of things. We're still married. We have figured out a lot of things for our relationship that work. We know how the other person acts. So you're not coming into it with a blank slate. So I think it's not a full restart. And just like your Redirect, I think it's a perfect name because it's your same person and you're redirecting. So I think you, as individuals, you're figuring that out. I think, and Dale, I think you gave a perfect example in your intro of how you've been able to figure out that balance. Those were not new things. The cycling, gardening might have been newer, but the cycling, the different thing, you found, the things that work for you that are your personal interests, and you found the things that you and Fran have that are your shared interest. And I think you try to set up that balance. I mean, Curt, you talked about finding that shared, one of the things that Gottman and Real and everybody still talks about the constant theme, and I use this in dealing with conflicts at work too. What's that shared agenda? What are those things you are both? There's usually something. There might be different ways to get there, but there's always a shared agenda, or you need to find that shared agenda. So just like Curt, we were talking about finding that outdoors, that's something you both enjoy. Boom, you found your shared agenda. It's something you've probably known about each other. Now you're really using it and intentionally saying, this is our shared agenda. Let's intentionally find ways to get there. So it's some of that discovery, but I think it's also knowing what you've already done and all these things you've been learning as a human, as a couple, as an individual all these years, and using that to your advantage.
I'll just add a real quick thought that I think you also have to take into account. You don't want all of that redirected energy to go toward just the relationship, because that's a lot of energy directed towards a relationship, right?
Creates pressure.
Yeah. Yes, like water pushing up against a dam is the way I'm imagining it, right? And you don't want that to burst. And so what I was suggesting is taking some of that energy and devoting it to yourself and sitting with yourself individually, separate from your spouse, and say, what is important to me right now? What do I want my time to look like? What are my values? Who are the other relationships in my life that I want to facilitate? Maybe some that I've taken a step back from because I didn't have time when I was raising a family or working full time. And so focusing on that too kind of gives a little bit of a split there. But
yeah, and I would just, one thing our marriage therapist helped us out way at the beginning of our relationship was I was more of, let's do everything together. We got to do this together. We got to do this together. And you can't see Andrea's face that she made. She was just rolling her eyes.
We can see it.
Yeah.
Right. Wish we were on video right now.
Right.
But take a picture of it.
I'll do it again for you.
But, so I think that's the beauty.
But this is good. Yeah.
And Dale, that was the beauty of what you extract. There's things that you like. There's things that Fran like. Andrea and I have found the things that she likes and she will do on her own. I have found, and I've heard that from Curt and Adam. I've heard that from you. You talk about those things you do on your own versus not. I think thinking of yourself, there's the individual self and then there's the couple self, and you're thinking about how to balance both of those. So I think the balance that Andrew's talking about is because I could see we're going to be at that transition when we're empty nesters soon, and I could see if it's all about me going to Andrew, what do you want to do? What should we do? She will be exhausted.
First.
Yeah.
So you said something that made me jump a little bit, Andrea, and that is sitting down, taking the time by yourself. I don't do that very well. How do you get yourself to that point where it's okay to go off and do this self-analysis?
I guess my first thought is to find that, you don't have to sit in a quiet room, darkened, with just your thoughts, because that does sound pretty scary if that's not something that somebody has done. Or to sit in a therapy office. You don't have to go those routes, but find an activity, a thing you like to do, and that thing can occupy your body. So it might be hiking, and you might go on some individual hikes, or it could be, it doesn't even have to be like a very physically active thing. It could be knitting for all, it doesn't matter, but something to occupy your body, because then that gives your brain something else to focus on, something else to do, so it's not so overwhelmed with just those internal thoughts. People get so overwhelmed with just the internal thoughts. It's why at nighttime we lie down and our brains just go haywire, because it's we're not doing anything and we're left with just ourselves. So,
do you think this is a contributing factor to the phenomenon of gray divorce, where in divorce rates tend to elevate when that empty nest, that new empty nest of retirement happens? Does this expose, or does it create an inordinate amount of pressure?
I think absolutely. I mean, yeah, I think that's probably part of it. That maybe those two people, if they're in this relationship and they're in this relationship for, could be decades, that they haven't spent the time alone developing that sense of self. And I know that's a very vague concept, a sense of self, but it's about knowing, again, like I said, what your values are, how you describe yourself to somebody else without using a noun, right? I'm a mom, I'm a psychologist, I'm a volunteer, I'm a whatever. If you can describe yourself without a noun, I'm empathic, I'm stubborn, I'm hardworking, right? We have to spend time being able to identify those things to go into a different time of life in a healthy way. And so doing that, if you haven't spent time doing that, and then now you're faced with these changing circumstances, that can be a lot for people. Yeah. And so I think that's probably part of it. I think there's also part of it that, again, if you're talking about women in general, again, whether it's in a heterosexual or other relationship, that you have women's changing roles over time, and we can't ignore that and how that factors into the changing divorce rates over time too. As in, women are becoming more independent and have been doing so over the past 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and that as women are now coming into a period of retirement and their spouse is coming into a period of retirement, they realize, oh, wait, this isn't what I want, or I can be independent. I can do something on my own. I can be financially independent. And you do have a greater proportion, not disproportionately more, but like a greater portion of women who are recognizing that and stepping back. So
Gottman actually talks about some of those shifting gender stereotypes as part of the challenges, or part positives, and then could potentially lead to some of those challenges that you talked about as well.
I'm going to give a scenario of something in how my mind thinks, and this is non-billable.
Says you. Yeah. Says you.
They're leaving the room.
So I think I'm hearing everything you say, and we brought up identity, we brought about change, transition, redirection. I think we have to be very deliberate in having authentic communication. And on my point of view, that if I saw something with two people that I was working with, that they were not seeing things eye to eye, or they could be doing things better, I, as a manager, would pull them together and just sort of start having questions and answers, right? And I'm going to say this because this is me. I don't know if I've actually done that with my wife. To treat it like it's a managerial thing, not to place that role, but the aspect to sit back and say, okay, let's settle the dust. Now let's have a conversation like what you were playing off of on, Andrea, is like, I'm a hard worker, and I feel as though I need to produce something, and now I'm not in that role. I'm going to need help with that, as opposed to being prideful, selfish, and saying, I'm just going to go out to lunch with the guys, and then that elephant is still sitting in the room.
You're retreating.
Yeah. I mean, is that something that is a Curt Brewer thing, or do you think that it might be a little bit more public?
Oh, that's not just a you thing. That's absolutely, yeah. Because again, we think about relationships as just sort of happening. I think, we meet somebody, we like them and we fall in love with them theoretically. And we're like, oh, okay, well, what's the next step? Okay, well, I guess we're going to get married and do what we're going to do, have kids or whatever. And so I almost want to say we take it for granted that relationship is there. And we don't recognize that just like a coworker relationship or a manager and a supervisee relationship, like those things, they need mediation. They need time to spend talking together, like what Kipp does at work, where he works with the employees together and say like, okay, what are you looking for? What are you looking for? It's not exactly like that. It's not a mediation session, but he works with individuals around how they can produce better output, a better work output, a better working relationship. And I think we don't oftentimes think about that. We just sort of assume I'll be married, then I'll be me, right? We don't take the time to actually sit and think about that a lot. So,
yeah, you gotta relationships take work. I mean, if you don't put in the work, it's gonna falter or it'll become insignificant or meaningless. I think you've got to constantly, and I think you all know this from each transition you go through, whether it's dating, getting married, having kids, which changes the dynamic completely, empty nesters to retirement. It's going to take intentional work every time. And I think I might have mentioned this last time. Lencioni is an author who talks about ideal conflict versus disruptive conflict versus artificial harmony. So ideal conflict's in the middle is where you want to be. Artificial harmony is where you avoid. You just say, oh, everything's great, we're great, and it's not really great. You grow resentment, you don't resolve issues, and you don't have that authentic, genuine connection and relationship. And that's a lot of times what we do, I think, in our work, and I think we try to do in our marriage when we try to do, I think people try to do, is get to that ideal conflict. It's not disruptive where you're name calling or being hurtful, but you're finding that right in between to have those, Curt, just like you're saying, those genuine conversations that get to it and help you grow, even though it's not comfortable. I do this with supervisors and their team members all the time. They don't give feedback because it's way easier not to. That also doesn't help the relationship. The best gift, I talk about this with leaders all the time, the best gift you can give is give real feedback, because then you can figure out how to do it. The shared agenda everybody has, usually in marriage, relationships, whatever, is let's have a good, productive, positive relationship. Part of that has to be dealing with some of that conflict, and I think people avoid it. It's not just Curt Brewer.
Somebody once said that great leadership was recognizing reality and then dealing with it.
Absolutely.
It sounds like it could be as simple as that. However, we're humans, and we're always looking for what's the structure. I mean, if you guys have to deal with a challenge, something's come up with, whether it's you or the kids, is there a kind of structure? Is there a way to approach it? Do you make the call? Do you make the call, Andrea? How do you get to that place to have that conversation where you're both going to be of the same mind to say, okay, let's solve this?
As they look at each other trying to figure out the answer.
Well, okay, so what I was going to say is that, and Kipp referenced this earlier, that we've been really lucky, and we've had the same couples therapist as part of our lives for, I think, 18 years now, so before we got married. And having that person who has helped us recognize when we are not aware, we're not unbiased, impartial on our own selves or in our own relationship, and for us to be able to go to him and say, here's what we're struggling with, and he can take that step back, obviously, and say, well, I've known you guys this long, here's what you're doing. I see you pulling, Andrea, this same MO from 20 years ago, or Kipp, I see you doing the same thing that Andrea does not respond well to. And sometimes you need that outside perspective, and that's where couples therapy can be really, really helpful and supportive. And then I do think that Kipp and I have gotten better at recognizing, not perfect and maybe not even great, but we've gotten better at recognizing the patterns that don't go well. Humans learn from patterns, right? We learn pattern recognition. We learn from over and over and over again, getting the literal or figurative door in the face. We learn not to do something. And so you develop the strategies with outside perspectives like a therapist, or by actually stopping and paying attention and talking about, I didn't like when you did that. I didn't like when you said this. Please don't ever say that again, or something like that. Even if it's said in anger, it's not as calm and cool and collected as I just said it. Hopefully that clicks in that other person's brain and they hear, oh, that's not something I should say again if I want this to go well.
That was a good strategy.
Yeah.
Just remembering how you handled that, and you're going to remember, oh my gosh, yes, you get to go back to that situation to be able to resolve the conflict.
I think this is I wanted to mention this earlier, and I think I'll say it really quickly here, because I'm not always able to say, oh yeah, that didn't go well last time. I think I'll use that logic and I'll not say those same things again, because I'm an emotional person.
Yeah, your emotions and body chemistry charge that up and erode that rationale.
Absolutely. And so one of the things, and again, this is a very simplistic approach to this concept, but I use this a lot in my therapy sessions, is the concept of wise mind. And again, I'm really taking this and making it sort of like fit this scenario, so no other psychologists come at me with this, but the wise mind is when you can incorporate that logic, rational thought, that prefrontal cortex that's coordinating and saying, wait, let me remember last time, let me think what happened, all of that, and the emotional part. So you're not squashing the emotion and just thinking logically. You're not going pure emotion and just going full force. You're incorporating both of those together. That is wise mind.
That's emotional regulation, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Well, it's recognizing that you have emotions and it's okay to have feelings. Feelings are natural, and they shouldn't be separate from your interactions, your logical thought.
And it's learning is the key word that's kind of coming to me when Andrea's talking about that too. It is everything. I describe this when I'm working with leaders, and I think it's true for marriages too, or relationships, is everything's an experiment. You are trying different things. You're learning from that. And I think that's if you're looking for the global statement, like what to do, I think it's learning from each other, learning what those individuals need, what that individual needs, learning how you're dynamic, because your dynamic is a whole different part of it that you're learning. Andrea and I, we'll get into ruts where we can't get out of that. That's when we go to our marriage therapist, and that's been extremely helpful. And both from that and from the time, how many ever years, 20 years we've been, whatever, a long time.
22 years.
Yeah, thank you.
Been together.
Yeah, that's what I was scared to say. In those years, we've learned from each other what to do, what not to do, and that doesn't mean I don't screw up plenty, as Andrew would tell you, and it's constantly learning from that. So if you're not learning in any relationship, I think you're struggling.
The word is growing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're not if you're learning, you're growing, and that's the key for any relationship.
Yep.
All right, I want to shift gears a little bit. We've talked about the relationship between husband, wife, spouse, whatever, and even I think a lot of those things can be related to best friends to a degree, right? Now I want to throw out there the aspect about our kids, adult children. Now you guys aren't there yet, okay? You still have kids at home. However, Andrea, you speak with adult children, and Kipp, you deal with the parents of adult children. So how does a relationship with an adult children evolve as we age?
So I think the first thing is that even when you're working with adult children, quote unquote, when you're working with the 18, 19, 20, even upwards of 25, 26, when I'm working with them as a therapist, I'm still working with their parents because...
Indirectly, of course.
Not always.
Wow.
That's kind of my point, is that there are a lot of parents who are very, very, very involved in their kids' lives, their adult child's life. And it kind of segues into what I was going to say, which is that you don't abandon your adult children. You don't say, okay, you're 18, I don't need to worry about this anymore. Or you're a college graduate, I'm not responsible for anything anymore. But you also really have to recognize, and it's a shifting, it's a redirect, right? Okay, I'm still a parent. I still need to be available. I still need to be emotionally supportive. I still need to help them financially if that's what they need. But I need to take a giant step back. And parents have a very difficult time. I'm I am not there yet. I've got a handful of years before I'm going to get there, but I imagine it'll be hard for me too, because I'm human, is that I no longer get to know where you are or how you're spending your money or what choices you're making or who you're dating or things like that.
I heard an interesting stat recently, like I think it was 2023 or 2024, maybe both, that like 26% of all job applicants for the people under the age of 30, their parents went with them to the job interview.
I would not doubt that.
And then like 18% of parents followed up and called the manager to determine if they acquired the job or didn't get the job, and if so, why. That the parental involvement at the job application level for young adults is crazy high percentage.
That stat doesn't surprise me, because again, just like I'm saying, as a therapist, right, their parents are just hyper involved right now, and again, I'm not judging these parents. We go through our own challenges and our own sort of redirect on who we are, and if we identify as part of our identity as parent, right, I need to always be present, or I need to be making decisions, or I need to be, then it's going to be very hard to all of a sudden step back and say I got nothing, I'm not responsible at all. So that's very hard.
Are your parents still alive?
Yeah, both of, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, now you're the adult children of your parents. How has that relationship changed in the sense that you have your own family that you're dealing with? You've got yourselves, your age demographic, which I don't know what your age demographic is, but you're younger than me, and you both are working, you both have teenage kids, and you have aging parents that are now a part of your life in different ways. How are you dealing with your parents aging, and are they able to have these authentic conversations with you when they might say to you, I don't necessarily want you to treat me like I'm losing my mind, because I have feelings too. And I don't want to be a burden in your life, because that's not what I want to do. So how are you guys, how do you deal with your aging parents?
Perfectly.
Yeah. Good answer.
Smooth sailing the whole time.
So I won't go into the details. We just had a very specific, very intentional, authentic conversation with my parents the other day. And I wouldn't say it was all sunshine and rainbows. But I think the fact that we had it ended up being a good thing. And I think it's the intentionality, and I'll just stick with that same theme. Things are shifting. Andrea talked about the shifting of roles. Just like your podcast, it's redirect. So it's not a new person. There's still history. There's still dynamics. It's still the same things but it is a big shift. And aging parents, and you can think about it, I saw this with my mom and her parents and how that worked and witnessed that. And I remember that whole shift where you go from the care receiver to the caretaker. And it's a slow process, and it's like a frog in boiling water. You don't quite know what's happening, but it does happen. And it's like where you see that change happens gradually over time, and it's something to be aware of. And I think if you aren't being aware of it and intentional with it, then you will get boiled. I think you've got to be very intentional and know it's happening. And I think, at least I'll say one thing, if you ask like what we do, I think we will not write the book on how to do this perfectly, I can tell you that. But I think we just had this really authentic conversation that was messy, but went well. And I think that is a strength and did help that transition.
I mean, for what it's worth, family therapy exists for a reason too, that it's not just couples or individuals. You can have, your parents in a therapy session with you, and that's okay. Maybe not in your therapy. If you're in individual therapy, maybe you want to do something separate, but having a space to talk and to say, like, you guys are important, and I want, or for your parent to say, we still want independence. We still value this. They're not incapable. At no point is somebody completely incapable of anything. So, or should be having all decisions made for them, unless that's something that was agreed upon a long time ago. But I think having the conversations and giving space for it, that is not something that comes easily to this country, to this culture, to this older generation. The idea, again, this is the mental health, the evolving concept and acceptance of mental health and of counseling and treatment, is that the older generations, including ours, it is not as acceptable to sit down in a therapy office, but that gives you the space to do it. The therapist can be completely quiet. They don't have to say a word. You can pay, whatever amount of money for, in theory, absolutely nothing except for the space, right? We're sitting in a space with the idea of this hour is dedicated to just talking about what it's going to be like together now that you're living in the same city we are, or now that you, as my parents, are struggling with your changing needs, and I don't know how to handle that with my parent or with my parenting responsibilities. So I think giving space for that, the intentionality is important, but I think we don't forget that the therapist's office isn't as scary as some people think it is.
Was the conversation that you guys had recently instigated by you or your parents?
My parents actually instigated it.
They did.
I was a little worried about it, but it went. I was glad they did it.
Because I have my boys, everybody's coming in for my wife's 70th birthday. I call it the 70th birthday month, but next week all the kids come in. I'm going to have the time, and we've addressed it here and there, and we're the same people who kind of manage our finances are now managing theirs, so the conversations on trusts and all that stuff are coming up. But there's also the conversation of, who's going to be holding my drool cup.
Right.
The reality of, what's going to happen is going to be kind of front and center. And I'm going to be initiating that conversation just because I want to make it real.
Yep.
And relationships change. And all of a sudden, I used to love what Khalil Gibran once said. We as parents were the bow. We never were going to aim that, that arrow who's our kids right at that target. Just want to generally get them in that right direction and let them make their own decisions. That's one thing my wife and I really agreed on, was releasing them when we start talking about that relationship. But now it's kind of like, okay, now we're the grandparents. They're coming in, by the way, with their grandkids, and we all had our ways of, disciplining and raising, and we shifted the way we think about that. But I want to have that conversation about our changing relationship for the next 30 years.
Yeah, no, good for you. I mean, caring and loving for somebody is hard. Like that when you have it, that's where a lot of conflict in marriages come from, is the loving and caring. That's where that relationship with parents and kids is going to come, that conflict's going to come from. Caring and loving. That is hard. It's way easier not to, because then you're not as invested. But when there's that investment, there's a lot of emotion. And like Dale, like you're saying, like having that conversation very intentionally can help put that out there and get to that shared agenda of that caring and love and coming up with that agreed approach.
So any final thoughts, any parting words?
Unfortunately, I see that our time is up for today. So it's been nice talking.
Really?
I'll look forward to next week. We can bring up these same
Looks
topics
like
again.
we'll have to have you back on the Redirect podcast.
We would like to thank the University of Cincinnati 1819 Innovation Hub for allowing us to record our episodes at the eSports Innovation Lab recording studio. Don't forget to tell your friends about the Redirect podcast and have them follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Instagram. Want more information? Do you have a question for Curt, Dale, or Adam? Or would you like us to consider a topic that interests you for a future podcast? Send us an email at info@redirect-u.com. Remember, the journey isn't over. It's just redirected. There's purpose in your life. Find it and do something about it. Hey, I've got one more comment. The Redirect podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. We engage in an open, honest conversations about personal growth, life transitions, and the lessons we've learned through our own experiences. While we speak as experts in our own lives, we are not licensed therapists, medical professionals, or certified coaches. The content shared on the Redirect podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the guidance of qualified professionals for any physical, mental, or emotional concerns that you may have. We're grateful to share this space with you and hope that our stories inspire reflection and connection. If you're in need of more support, we encourage you to connect with a trusted professional who can help.